When it comes to the mafia, if someone disrespects you, you take action. When it comes to mafia movies, if the critics disrespect it, we take action. And when it comes to mobsters, that disrespect ain't personal, it's business. And we're about to give you a counter review you can't refuse. Because we're here to prove to you that this 1991 mob boss movie is not that bad. Welcome to this edition of It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies. And you know what's funny? Every now and then we'll take a look at a movie and go, okay, well that seems like it's pretty cool and good cast and storyline seems different. And then you take a look at how the critics rated it and you sit there and go, that's unjust. That must go defended. And we're here to talk about exactly one of those kind of movies, 1991's Mobsters. And joining me for the show is the sexiest hit woman of all time, my wife, Carrie. Carrie, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, although I had to look around the room and think that maybe Angelina Jolie was in the house or...
I'm just trying to think now.
Julia Roberts?
Quite possibly, yes. No, they're not here. No, they're not here. Don't look at the closet. Okay, so full disclaimer here, because my wife, I think, was a little bit more excited to talk about this movie than I am, because not only is she a fan of, mafia type movies, she also might have a little thing for Christian Slater. So when you realize I'm calling you out.
Oh, you just shared my deepest, darkest secrets.
Well, I'll tell you what, when we get to do a Rachel Lee Cook movie, then you can call me out, okay? But in all fairness, though, when you realize that this movie, which we personally have on VHS in our home collection here, by the way, a VHS is a video cassette for those of you who have never heard of the damn clunky things. When you realize that this movie actually qualifies, and not just qualifies, but qualifies in a big way, what was your first reaction?
I am just heartbroken that this is even a contender. I have so much to say, so let's get this started.
All right. Before we do get this started, though, first of all, I need to apologize for listeners or regular listeners to the show. If my voice seems a little off, don't worry. I'm not sick.
He was just fighting for his right to party.
Okay, full disclaimer here. I am in a band, just a cover band, nothing special, nothing. But
you guys are special.
Oh, we are special. At least maybe not the way you think of here, but we played our first doubleheader since basically the start of 2020. So my voice is a little bit on the gone side, but I was still stoked to record the podcast here. So I'm going to do my best to take this 1991 movie and trailerize it. They were mob bosses of their day. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and Bugsy Siegel. So who better to play the lords of the concrete jungle than a bunch of guys who graced the pages of Tiger Beat? Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, and Richard Greco star in Mobsters, a movie about bad people doing bad things. But it's not that bad because they like each other, so that makes it okay. Watch as Christian Slater's motivation for the whole movie seems to come from the humiliation of his father, the veritable nut crunch of destiny. Lucky and the boys look to put the squeeze on everyone in this loose retelling of the mob days of New York City. Mobsters, also known as the other movie about Bugsy Siegel, released in 91, rated R. The nut crunch of destiny.
Man.
Well, now that being said, if Jack Black comes out with Tenacious D and the nut crunch of destiny, I would pay. Just take my money. Take my money. I would go see that film. Okay, so 1991's Mobsters starred Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, Costas Mandylor. I know this isn't Star Wars. Apparently his last name is actually Mandylor. Richard Greco, Anthony Quinn, Lara Flynn Boyle, Michael Gambon, Chris Penn, and the voice of Khonshu himself, F. Murray Abraham. However, there's an almost starred on this one. Because almost starring as Charles Lucky Luciano was Johnny Depp.
Ooh.
And this actually would have repaired him with Richard Greco back from their 21 Jump Street days. I just wonder, though, if you had Depp and Greco in a mobster movie, would people just be calling it 1921 Jump Street?
You know what? No disrespect to Johnny Depp. I think he would have been great, but not as Lucky Luciano. I need Christian Slater to be in this movie. However, I think he could have quite easily been one of the four.
He could have. I could actually have seen him act in the role that Richard Greco played, Bugsy Siegel, because, it's kind of like the same performance. But I don't know. I really don't know if Johnny Depp would have been been as good as Lucky Luciano as Christian Slater.
No, but maybe if he had played Frank Costello.
You know what's funny? As you mentioned that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the breakdown there. I think that would have been a good thing for Frank Costello, but I don't know if it would have been so much as good for the movie, because really the focus of the movie seemed to be more on Luciano and Meyer Lansky, and the other two were kind of in the background more so. But putting someone of Johnny Depp's star at that time might have taken away from what Christian Slater and Patrick Dempsey were bringing to it.
I think it would have been fascinating. It definitely, I think it would have added that star power, but the movie was already so stacked with talent. The
funny thing is, though, it's stacked, I think, more in hindsight when you take a look at that cast. But of course, let's be honest, like Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, like, say what you will, right? Joke about the Tiger Beat kind of thing, but they were the hottest thing at that time. And let's put this into perspective here, okay? Christian Slater was in this movie, 1991. This was 1 year after both Pump Up the Volume and Young Guns 2. It's the same year that Robin Hood Prince of Thieves came out, and it was a year before Cuffs. And I think it was only about like 3 years after Heathers. Like, this is peak Christian Slater time. I don't even know if Johnny Depp is as big as Christian Slater in 1991.
That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
It would have definitely been interesting to see. I actually would have loved to have seen Johnny Depp on the other side of the law as Mad Dog.
That would have been very, very interesting.
Ooh, that would have been good.
I could see that. I could very, very easily see that. The movie was directed by Michael Karbelnikov, and I do hope I am pronouncing these names right. Michael Karbelnikov. This was his cinematic directorial debut, and since that time, he has only directed one other full-length movie. That was FTW, which was written by and starred Mickey Rourke. So when you realize that this movie is actually like it's a directorial feature film debut, it's almost a bit more. It's kind of cool when you realize that, because really I thought it was actually fairly well directed, although I do have some quibbles about it, but that's just me. As far as the accolades go, the quote-unquote accolades, this movie racks them up because both Christian Slater and Anthony Quinn were nominated for Worst Supporting Actor at the Razzies that year. Both of them lost to Dan Aykroyd in the movie Nothing But Trouble. But the fact that this one fascinates me. Like Anthony Quinn as worst supporting actor, okay, sure, I get that. But arguably, Christian Slater is the star of this film, and he's nominated in worst supporting actor. Is that a weird look at it, or is this a testament to the ensembleness of the way this cast is supposed to be?
I think Slater gave an absolutely brilliant performance, so I just don't see it. I don't see how he could have been so grilled for this role.
But that's the funny thing, though. He was nominated for worst supporting actor, which is interesting. Let's be honest. Christian Slater is the central star of this film. I think we can agree on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So
if he's going to be nominated for something, it should be nominated, for worst actor,
lead,
period, but not worst supporting actor. And I think that's an interesting take on that, because if Christian Slater is looked at as a supporting actor in this, that screams ensemble cast. And that's actually a good thing when you think about the grandioseness of the storyline involved. It's almost like the weird backhand compliment when you take a look at that. Downside, this is a money loser. According to IMDb.com, this film had a budget of $23 million. In the box office, it only made, again, according to IMDb, worldwide gross $20.2 million. So as far as your box office goes, it lost $3 million. It was the only debuting movie on the July 26th, 1991 weekend, and debuted at number 2. The number 1 film that week was Terminator 2, Judgment Day. And let's be honest, I know I personally saw Terminator 2 in theaters at least twice. It was the movie of 1991. But just to put it into perspective here, Christian Slater in the box office that weekend, Mobsters, number 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, in its 7th week, was still sitting at number 6. So, I mean, it's up there. And it made $6 million in that opening weekend. And that's $6 million $1991. So that's actually not too bad. I mean, to think that it was going to leapfrog Terminator 2, I mean, that's a tough call for what is arguably a smaller, gangster film. The critics, however, were not kind to this, because over on Rotten Tomatoes, this film sits at a 57% audience score. So, not bad audience score, all things considered. The critic score, a measly, minuscule, paltry 6%. That seems overly harsh.
Since we're talking about critics here, I just have to read this one by Peter Rayner of LA Times, Los Angeles Times. Now, this was back from 2013, but the quote was, "Mobsters looks like it was made by people who have seen too many gangster films for people who haven't seen any. There isn't a breath of life in the filmmaking." Now,
harsh.
That is harsh. That is absolutely and to add to it, I thought, you know what? I'm going to delve into and see what The Godfather was rated.
Okay.
And it was high up in the 90s, depending on if you're looking at 1, 2, or 3. 3 being the lowest rated. And that was more, I think, of actor's debut and performance.
Well, keep in mind, too, Godfather carried with it a lot of the weight of the Mario Puzo book that came before it. So, I mean, Godfather was very, very, very highly anticipated. To the point even where, and I off the top of my head, I don't know what streaming service has it, but they basically made not necessarily a docudrama, but a dramatization of what it took to make The Godfather. There's a big story there. Godfather is bigger than life. when it comes to mafia movies. This is arguably on a much smaller scale.
Interesting that you say that, because I did find a critic's review that looked recent. It was actually from February of 22 by Richard Roper, Chicago Sun-Times, sorry, my apologies. The Godfather is the most memorable, most influential, most quoted, most beloved, most discussed, most imitated, most revered, and most entertaining American movie ever made. So,
that's a big statement on that one.
It's a big statement, and the parallel I'm trying to draw. Did he
kiss the ring when he wrote that? I'm curious now.
He did not want to wake up with the horsey head.
Like that is. I was going to say that's almost like, someone got a hold of the review that was originally written by the previous critic, and then something bad happened to them, and the new critic was all of a sudden like, "The Godfather is the greatest film ever. Please don't hurt me."
Exactly. Right. It's interesting to note that Mobsters, I think, was critically panned because it was so compared to movies that came before it, i.e. The Godfather. Another sticky point with a lot of the critics, or a lot of the criticism of Mobsters, was the level of violence. Okay.
Really?
So, yeah. Right? And I found that they handled any violent scenes by a montage.
Like, did they see Godfather 1 and 2? Like, for reals?
Exactly. And I mean, you have to realize that this is a tale about mob life. So any exuberant violence, that's probably pretty legit and pretty on the level.
I hope they don't watch Gangs of New York. Holy shit.
Now, where I am going with this is I also thought, you know what? I'm going to look up a more fun, lighthearted look at mafia life. And I checked out Dick Tracy.
Which came out the year before this.
Right. Which was quite high in the ratings. I can't remember exactly the Rotten Tomatoes score. It was in the 80s, I believe.
I get
like
that.
84, I think. I'll have to fact check that. But one of the critics' reviews for that was, for all its violence, it remains jolly. Its boisterous moral tone softened here and there by moments of cautious sentimentality.
Sentimentality.
Thank you. Wow. Sentimentality.
English good.
I think I need to pour myself another cider.
Right. Well, here's the thing though with Dick Tracy, right? I mean, you can call it a mobster film as much as you want, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Dick Tracy is a comic book movie because, of course, it came from the Dick Tracy comic book scripts, and Dick Tracy is a marvel of 90s comic book movies because it really was a almost faithful comic book adaptation to that old newspaper strip. And when people saw it, it was like, yeah, this is perfect for what it's covering. Same thing with The Godfather, right? People, like, when people read that book and then they saw the movie, they're like, yeah, they got it. They really got it. But I think there's also, and I'm not saying that I know what was in the critics' heads when they rated this so freaking low, but I have a feeling there might have been a little bit of mafia fatigue, because also released in 1991, all right, you had the movie Bugsy, which of course was also about Bugsy Siegel, played by Richard Grieco in this.
Did that not come out after Mobsters?
1991. This is the same release year. Also in that year, a much totally different film, The Marrying Man, also had Bugsy Siegel as a character. Also released in 1991 was Billy Bathgate, which had Lucky Luciano as a character in the film. Like, when Hollywood had a hard-on for mobster movies in 1991. And I could see a little bit of that kind of fatigue. It's kind of like the year when Armageddon came out, which happened to be like 2 months after Deep Impact came out. It's like, oh, good, yet another asteroid is coming to destroy us. It's just one of those things where Hollywood kind of gets in waves, where like, 1 year will be like the year of the giant comet that comes attacks us, and then another year will be like, oh, we got lots of robots this year, kind of thing. This was the year where the gangster made a comeback, kind of thing. And in the grand scheme of, like, let's be honest, Bugsy is a huge film. Mobsters is not. And I'm not saying that to diss on Mobsters, but it's not Oscar level Bugsy. So, I mean, the fact that it came out in the same year, it's like, it almost feels like the ugly stepchild of that. That would be like if you took this movie and put it out the same year as Godfather Part 2. Right? Godfather Part 2 being like one of those rare occasions where the sequel is better than the original. It would pale in comparison. And I think that might be a little bit of it, in that it pales in comparison to Bugsy. But 6%, that straight up bull.
It was incredibly unfair. And I think, like, I still fail to see any flaw in the performance of any one of the actors. Like everything from even down to the, like the performance of the dancers in, their restaurant scenes or whatever. Like, it was just so incredible. The costuming, the music, there's a singer that is just so incredibly brilliant. I mean, all of the actors, they played it so incredibly well. Like, it was fun to watch.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't like one of those really dark and disturbing, like, whoa, did this actually happen in history? Was mafia life really this gritty and,
what?
Hard to see.
Let's start the breakdown right there as far as storyline goes, because as I was doing my research and all that for the breakdown and stuff like that, and I'm seeing all these connections and all that, and just stories of Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky and all that, and you realize, I mean, yeah, they'll come out and say that this movie, is loosely based on real events. We know that these are real mobsters, kind of thing, and a lot of the beats in this film were taken from actual real life events. And you realize that, wow, the fact that a lot of this is actually pretty close to what happened, even though some of it may be glossed over and some of it might be a tad bit altered for dramatic storytelling effect. But there's a lot of, like, when you realize that this actually happened, it adds a much deeper layer into this. Like, and like, I full disclaimer, we weren't born in 1921, so we don't know what life was like back then, back in New York. But like, it felt real when you realize that a lot of this is based on reality. But let's start at the top of the bill, though, with Christian Slater, Charlie Lucky Luciano. And as much as you say that you thought he was great in this, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, in that just let me go through the list of, like, the with that list again of movies that came out around this time: Pump Up the Volume, Young Guns 2, Robin Hood, Cuffs. And if you go back and watch it, his performance in a lot of these films, it's almost like he Gary Sinise his way through, like, 1988 to like 1992, in that it's a Christian Slater performance in a historical feature. did that feel like, because you're the Christian Slater fan here? Like, I don't know if you had pictures of him up on your wall when you were a wee girl.
Oh, it was all about the eyebrow.
But how did this role stand out from those other films for you?
I can agree that, yes, I mean, it definitely was Christian Slater as Lucky Luciano. Like, I have no doubt, I have never researched or really known a lot about Lucky Luciano and his history and his personality. So I can only imagine that this is, quite honestly, Christian Slater playing this character in his own style. And I can imagine that Lucky Luciano would be quite different from Christian Slater's portrayal of him. However, you know what? I found he was enjoyable to watch. The narrative of how this tale was presented. Like, I absolutely loved that it filled in a lot of the back story or a lot of the information that perhaps they didn't want to
crunch of destiny.
That they didn't want to invest the time in making it, any longer of a movie. So the narrative kind of, did exactly what it was intended to do. Tied the story together, helped it move along faster. I don't know. I don't see anything flawed in his performance. It was very much, as you say, a Christian Slater playing Lucky Luciano. But it was still quite enjoyable. And I think he had the charm and the charisma to make it believable that he could indeed become a mob boss, to come up from nothing, to witness the nut crunch of death.
The nut crunch of destiny.
Destiny, yeah, sorry. You know what? His motives were very clear and, made aware very early in the movie. So I think as far as storyline, it went along very quickly and very rapidly. And what I really liked about it is how they kind of not fast forwarded the details, but they kind of give you little synopsis of his progression and his rise to the top of I guess the power line, or
like the quest to become like the boss of all bosses kind of thing. But and this is going to seem unfair to Christian Slater, because I honestly thought he was actually quite good in it. I think Christian Slater is a phenomenal actor. But this is around his Tiger Beat time. And that's not on him. That's just his popularity, his look, the age that he was at that time. Like I went through a list of other actors who have played Lucky Luciano, because this is a little bit of a hard one, right? Because when you are playing a real life person, you have an image in your mind of what that person should be, how they should look, how they should act, how they should sound. And listen to this list of people who have played Charlie Lucky Luciano. Okay. Vic Tayback, Stanley Tucci. Okay. Tucci actually played him in Billy Bathgate, that was released in 1991 as well. Andy Garcia, Anthony LaPaglia, Terry Savalas. You get an image in your head of
very different.
Exactly. Of that image of Lucky Luciano in their head, right? And
So would this have been a younger?
yeah, this is the beginning of Lucky Luciano and his rise to become, well, at least not become the boss of all bosses, because of course, he created that whole thing about, with the other bosses and all, and how there's, the commission, if you will, right? Like how there's no boss. They're almost like a corporation at that point. So this is a very much young, early era Charlie Lucky Luciano on the rise, not on the downfall of things. I think Christian Slater probably got unfairly maligned in this because he was so, for lack of a better term, tiger beat in this.
You know what, though? I am going to respectfully disagree.
Ooh.
I see what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. However, I fully believe that the intention of this movie was to show their youth, their charisma, their, you have four arguably handsome gentlemen who are coming up from nothing. They're literally coming up from street punks, right?
Yeah.
You see their rise. They start to dress better. They start to become revered in their neighborhood. When they finally get taken under the wing of, help me out here,
Rothstein.
Yeah. And you can see that progression. And I think it was also evident with Bugsy's character, where he had, the women just hanging off of him. And I really think that youth and that sex appeal, they made gangsters look sexy.
Yeah. Which I will say this, first things first, we'll talk about Patrick Dempsey in a second here. But when you realize, right, that Lansky and Siegel were like it was like the two groups, right? Because, Luciano had Frank Costello, right? Like they were best buds kind of thing. And then Lansky and Siegel, like they kind of grew up together as well. Like they kind of came up together, and then like the two groups kind of merged together. But when you realize that it was Lansky who had to make the call to have Siegel killed, and this is their early story, right? It's eerie because you know what happens next. Like after, of course, the events of this movie happen, right? It's a bit more harsh, right? When you see that interplay between Lansky and Siegel. But let's talk about Meyer Lansky. All right, Patrick Dempsey, a young Patrick Dempsey. Here's the weird thing about this, in that, and this is what baffles me about that, the Razzie nomination for Christian Slater as worst supporting actor, because Patrick Dempsey is arguably the number 2 guy in this film, at least as far as the billing goes. But he wasn't really. There were times where I'm like, oh yeah, Meyer Lansky's in this too, right?
I think he had the best lines, though.
Oh, he did. He very much did. But the thing with Meyer Lansky, in real life, and just basically from what I've researched and all that, is that he was more of a behind the scenes kind of guy. So it made sense that there were stretches of this film where he felt like they're like all of a sudden like, where did Lansky go? And then like 20 minutes later, I'm back kind of thing. Like it made sense when you realize that Lansky was more of a behind the scenes guy in real life anyways.
He was the business. He was definitely the brains behind the Bronze, and he was also a family man, right? Like he wasn't interested in the women, and he just had his one girl. And, I think definitely very much the visionary of the four, and probably I would assume and guess that very much a powerhouse in their rise to power.
You had the brains in Lansky, you had the brawn in Siegel, and you had the brave in Luciano, right? And I mean that's not nothing against Frank Costello, but really, in this movie, it's about those three. You know, and that's a shame because Costas Mandylor. I apologize if I mess up your name. So Costas Mandylor, this is the way. As Frank Costello, he felt glossed over in this. Like he really did. Like it was hard at times for me. And again, this is me not being the biggest fan of, well, not the biggest fan of, but not the biggest purveyor of mafia and gangster films. You know, I see a bunch of guys in fedoras, right? And that's the problem, is that Frank Costello felt like just another guy in a fedora in this.
You know what I loved is his line when Meyer Lansky is like handing out the whiskey.
Yeah.
And he's using like the glass half full to the glass to the brim. But then Costello's line of, I see I ain't getting no whiskey. You know, like he very much, it's almost kind of like he owned that he was number 4 in the pecking order. And I kind of think, you know what, he had to be there. He was instrumental to the group, but I think you're right that it was very much the three, you know, the brave, the bronze, and the brains, who were very much leading the charge. And, you know, but they definitely needed him to round things out.
But getting back to Patrick Dempsey, though, right? At one point, like early on, I'm like, wow, he is really young looking in this. Like I'm used to a bit of an older looking Patrick Dempsey kind of thing, but I think it works in here because it's not a naivete young kind of thing. This is you know, the indestructibleness of youth in him, in that, you know, just even in that whole opening scene, right? Meyer wouldn't back down. He wouldn't stay down. He was always ready for more kind of thing. You had to admire that. Basically discount Captain America at that point. You do this all day.
Very much. I mean, you know what? I did love his tenacity. And I mean, obviously, the age of the actors at the time, and as you say, the Tiger Beat era, you know, where these 4 guys are, you know, teen heartthrobs. Let's put it that way. I think maybe why I'm so passionately, and I'm so passionate to defend this movie, because I was that teen girl growing up in the 90s, like loving all 4 actors. Oh, maybe, okay, arguably
3
at
of
least
them,
Christian Slater. But with that, okay, Richard Greco, you know, not so bad.
Jump Street,
not so bad. Johnny Depp, yeah, for sure. Throw him in the cast. But it really was, if you look at it like, it was maybe produced for a younger audience, and to kind of share that little piece of history, that mafia era, with the younger audience. Maybe if critics had looked at it that way, then they would have been a little more open-minded. This is not like, you know, the next generation of mafia movie. This is very much for the younger audience. And it was so enjoyable to watch, as, you know, in my age range, the Tiger Beat era of having, you know, the posters on the wall. It's almost like if you want to take a look at, like, say maybe the reverse angle of this, right? If there were 4 historical female mafia, like
mafioso bosses kind of thing, and they had a movie around this time where it's like, all right, let's get Debbie Gibson, Alyssa Milano, Drew Barrymore, and we'll go find that redhead who used to be in Head of the Class kind of thing, and we'll put him in here. Like, that's almost like the equivalent of that, and part of it too. And again, this is almost unfair to the actors themselves, in that you've got 4 guys who are at that peak level of popularity, as far as, teen heartthrob type level, and you're playing real mobsters. I wonder if this movie would be less panned if it was a story, inspired by the actions and the mobsters of the day, but a fictional take, so it's not Lucky Luciano, it's, some other fictional character.
Yes, I see where you're going with that. Like, if they had just made it
an original story with the original characters,
yeah.
Although admittedly inspired by the exploits of the time. Yet,
I like that they made it so watchable and so enjoyable, and to, their best efforts, historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember being a really young girl dining at Capone's restaurant, and you walk through the door and you're transported to the 1920s and the bootleg era and the world of gangsters and mafioso, and it's just so glamorous, as I'm sure violent and really horrific as it was.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of mystique or just appeal to.
There's a romanticism to the era,
the glamour of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this movie really focuses on that, on the sex appeal of the mafia world, right? Mob world.
Which is interesting, because one of the critiques was about the violence in the film, and yet it's a romanticized take of a brutal era. That almost seems in contradiction to itself. But I mean, it's
But it was. I mean, even the violent scenes were done either in a montage.
Mm-hmm. Again, very Dick Tracy like.
Yeah, and that's why I had looked up Dick Tracy, because watching this, I'm like, this really kind of feels like Dick Tracy in that they really want to glamorize, again, the mob life, which I'm sure was very gritty.
You don't choose the mob life chooses you. I mean, getting back to Costas Mandalore kind of thing, and again, his character is kind of glossed over kind of thing, but like, he had a good 1991. This was one of 3 films that he was in that was released that year. There was this, there was The Doors, and there's one of my favorite comedies from the early 90s era, Soap Dish. Like, he had a good 1991. I just felt like
he was in The Doors.
He was in The Doors.
Oh.
Yeah. We have to go back and take a look at that now, don't you?
I think I will.
Now, let's get over to Bugsy Siegel here. Richard Greco, 1921 Jump Street. It's, the funny thing is Bugsy Siegel was a womanizer in real life. So this is a very accurate portrayal of him. Again, at least from what I've read kind of thing. I didn't know the guy. But how was Richard Greco to you? Like, he seemed to almost fit right into the pocket of this role, right? Knowing that the focus is going to be on the partnership between Luciano and Lansky, and Siegel is not the main point, but he's a big enough point, and his character is big enough as far as the grand scheme of things. How was Richard Greco for you?
He was so pivotal, especially at the end where he had to kill Chris Penn's character. Was it Tommy?
Yeah, Chris Penn doesn't fare well in these kind of...
Yeah, but you know what? His loyalty to his crew. I mean, he grew up with Charlie, being best buds.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that history, having that that undying loyalty to his friends first, and it was so incredibly. First of all, he played the women magnet very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think out of the four of them, he had to play the character of Bugsy.
Oh yeah.
I couldn't see the casting being any different, and actually, I couldn't see Johnny Depp playing Bugsy's character. I just don't think he has the same sex appeal that Richard Grieco.
Grieco fits in this role, like an absolute glove.
You know who actually would have been a really good second choice if they had to recast would be John Stamos.
You know what's funny? I can
as Bugsy
see that.
Siegel.
I can see that. And the thing is, I could also see John Stamos as Lucky Luciano.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay.
But and again, this isn't a knock on Christian Slater, but John Stamos in 1991 would have been perfect
John
in this
Stamos,
movie.
Johnny Depp, Richard Grieco, and, well, you know what, though? Yes and no.
I mean, I think...
I don't want to recast Christian Slater.
See, and I don't want to recast Meyer Lansky because doing this...
No, you can't.
No, because doing the same thing that I did with Luciano, here are some of the actors who have played Meyer Lansky in other roles. Ben Kingsley and Dustin Hoffman. And when you realize that, you take a look at Patrick Dempsey back then and you think about Dustin Hoffman, that's smart casting. Like, if Mobsters is being redone today, that's the kind of role you put Miles Teller in. Like, it's Patrick Dempsey was crystal perfect casting for Lansky, and I think Grieco was perfect for Bugsy Siegel.
I have to interject right there with a question.
Yes.
I have a question. If this movie were to be produced today with the same lineup of characters.
Yep.
Older.
Mm-hmm. Older or of that age?
As of today, Christian Slater, graying and everything.
Right.
As much as I love him, he is getting older, and we're all getting older, and a little bit more salt and pepper. So
I'm a bit more salt and pepper these days, but go on.
The same four actors today playing these characters. Do you think that the critics might give this movie a bit more respect?
No. I don't.
And I'm suggesting with a recut using the footage of them. If you were to recut the 91 movie where they were teens, young men growing up in the streets of New York, to today being the crime boss rising to the age and the stage where they left off.
See, I think I think there's something to be said about mafia movie fatigue in 1991, in that there was so much, and some of it featuring some of the same characters and same real life people from this film. I think if you take this same script and you recast it and you reshoot it today, it does well. Or does it though? Because if you remember, there was that gangster film that came out. I can't remember off the top of my head. I cannot remember the name of the movie, but it had Emma Stone in it, and it was like that kind of era gangster film. And if memory serves, it didn't do well at all. So I wonder if that, younger mobster heartthrob romanticism of the era kind of thing just doesn't fly. Whereas a movie like The Godfather, or even Bugsy, where it takes the mobsters at a bit of an older age kind of thing, when they're really in the thick of it and whatnot, that seems to be the more realistic, less romanticized take on gangster era films. But let's step away from the main four here. And let's get to the dons and the bosses kind of thing. But I want to start with Rothstein. As played by the voice of Khonshu himself. He will never be anything else but to me now. He is the voice of Khonshu. F. Murray Abraham. Look, he's a phenomenal actor. He is great. And when he was on screen with these guys, he made everyone else great too. Like that whole thing where Rothstein is quizzing Luciano, right, on what would you do kind of thing. I mean, first of all, I had to stop myself from hearing Dennis Hopper's voice in my head going, pop quiz, hot shot. But, there was just something so genuine about this, for lack of a better term, personality test that Rothstein was throwing at Luciano. And it was such a brilliant tete-a-tete kind of scene.
I cried when he died. I absolutely loved that he took these young punks under his wing, and he was so instrumental in their rise to power and fame.
Mm-hmm. And when you start reading about Rothstein, like the real Rothstein kind of thing, and you realize that he almost acted sometimes as like a mob mediator kind of thing, and you could almost see, just in reading about him, why he was the perfect mentor for these guys. And as played by F. Murray Abraham, right? I mean, that's just
brilliant.
Right?
It was brilliant.
Because he brought a gravitas to that role without it being over the top, without it being like, without it being, a caricature of mafioso of the time, right? He was a businessman. He had a product he needed to sell, and he didn't want to go through, the dons at the top at the time because he knew what was going to happen. He would just, he'd be in business for a bit and then he'd be dead. Mm-hmm. Right? And then that business that he cultivated would be theirs. Here was a chance to basically build a crew, build a team, teach them the business side of it. And, you had that mentor-mentee relationship. And yeah, like it was blunt and brutal the way he died.
He was smart.
Yeah,
he was
very
such a smart man.
Mm-hmm. And he was always that voice of reason to Luciano as well, right? Like he knew that it was a cutthroat business. He knew that bad things needed to be done, but he also knew that there was, how lightly sometimes you had to tread in order to be able to get what you needed to get. Right. And he was always very cognizant of like, if you do this, right, you got to do it right or you're going to be dead.
He also saw the, braveness or the strength in Luciano. Mm-hmm. He knew that Luciano could be a leader, would be. There was no question. That
was also, and I just want to get back to Patrick Dempsey for a second. That scene where they hire the kid to come into the room and just say that someone's got a job for you, right? And don't say anything else, and let the kid try to figure out who the boss is just based on gut instinct of who's the one in charge. Who's the leader here? That's a brilliant social experiment to begin with, right? Who's the one in charge? Like if you walk into a room knowing that one of these two has a job for you, what's the thought process that goes through one's mind in trying to determine who it actually is? That is a fascinating social experiment, right? But in that scene, it played up so well because Luciano seemed almost at first like a reluctant leader, and it was great because the most reluctant of leaders are usually the best ones.
I looked at him differently. I looked at him as the strong, silent type.
Lansky or Luciano?
Luciano.
Really?
Luciano. I saw him as he had that, maybe didn't have a vision, but he had the confidence to make it happen.
Yeah.
He didn't quite know what was going to happen, but he had the confidence to make something.
Exactly. Luciano had the goal. Lansky had the plan, right? And Rothstein had the lessons to teach them in order for them to be able to accomplish everything.
I just wanted to add to that I really think that you were right in saying that very much.
No, you can just stop it. I was right.
Charlie's motivation really was to not defend his father, but there's a word that I can't think. Avenge. He wanted to avenge his father.
The nut crunch of destiny.
That was really his motivator. I think aside from that, his rise to fame and power was very much because of Lansky.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like that kind of humiliation of his family, right? And all joking aside about the nut crunch of destiny here, right? But but there was
also the
fondling and forceful kissing of his mother kind of thing. And,
right. He wanted to avenge his mother as well, and also his sister who was ill.
Who was ill at the time, yeah.
Wanting to take the family's money,
yeah.
At a time when his sister needed medical care.
That's a grudge that was held, but held in check. And I like the fact that they weren't this whole "I will avenge my father" thing. I will avenge my family. That wasn't mentioned again until that scene where they got rid of Ferranzano, right? They weren't didactic about it. They weren't hammering this home like this was the sole, raison d'etre of Lucky Luciano. It was very much like he cautiously, silently bided his time. Right? He had reason to kill both Dons, but it wasn't like, every 10 minutes, like, yeah, I'm going to get this guy because what he did to my family. Like, that would have been melodramatic and over the top.
Again, the strong, silent type.
Absolutely. But also a level of restraint in the script and the direction of this that didn't make it a one-note revenge story and made it more a glossing of the early years of these four, New York mobster era bosses. Like just really, really smart scripting and how it didn't have to say that, right? Like,
I tend to wonder, in reality, and I probably should have researched this, but in reality, these four legitimately grew up as childhood friends.
Oh yeah.
Like this actually, that part of the script was actually based on reality.
As you read up more and more about this, right? Like, yeah, Rothstein was shot in the back of the head at a poker game for lack of paying debts. It was Luciano who had ordered Ferranzano killed, right? Like, there's a lot that now he himself, Luciano, didn't kill Mad Dog, but when they say this is loosely based on real stories, the basis for the beats in this film is there. And the more you watch and the more you read, the more you appreciate this film and what it actually is. Don't look at this as the hottest, and you could say that as far as popularity or attractiveness, the hottest actors at the time in four iconic gangster roles, and we're going to make a salad out of it. It's a smart film with a lot of reality basing the motivation of everything. But let's get to the Dons here. Let's start with Anthony Quinn, Don Massaria. I hate to say it, but I actually agree with the Razzies for nominating him for Worst Supporting Actor. And I'm going to go to one of our favorite films, Repo the Genetic Opera. The worst part of Repo the Genetic Opera is Paolo Sorvino. because it's just so over the top. It's just so out there. To the same token as well, I think the worst part of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, surprisingly, is also Paul Sorvino, because it's almost like a caricature of what a boss is. Anthony Quinn, it's cartoonish. I found it very cartoonish. And I don't know what your thoughts were on this, but to me, it was just a touch. It was over the top.
And I tend to wonder if that was in the direction or like if it was intentional.
Now, here's the interesting thing, though. I'm going to put an asterisk on my ideas or my thoughts on his portrayal of Don Ferranzano as Don Mazzaria. Because as I was reading this and doing my research, Anthony Quinn, the actor, was apparently friends with the real Frank Costello. So it is quite possible that Anthony Quinn actually had some insight into what Don Mazzaria was like as a real person. And if Mazzaria was like that in real life, then I take back what I said, and Anthony Quinn is a brilliant portrayal of this. Because he had that inside knowledge, because he knew Frank Costello. But for someone who, on the outside, not knowing that, it may seem like a cheap characterization, a cartoonish representation of what a mafia boss is, but he might know something we don't, or might have known something.
That's fascinating to find out.
Right?
Huh.
On the flip side, though, Michael Gambon as Don Ferranzano.
Oh, so good.
He was cruel. He was cunning. He was ruthless. He was perfect in this.
He really was.
Right? And this was the interesting thing, is that Ferranzano and Mazzaria are portrayed as two very, very different Dons, one of whom seemed menacing. And that was, of course, Ferranzano, right? Mazzaria, to me, never felt like a threat. He never felt like, like this was the guy who was going to be the one to actually cut your balls off, right? Ferranzano was the one who was just going to rip him off with his own hand, but Mazzaria never really seemed menacing.
Oh, I don't know. I think I look at it otherwise. I think, he would be the one you would never see coming.
It's possible.
And that makes it even more frightening.
Well, the thing is, when you're doing research, and I will say, as I was prepping for this show, I found myself fascinated in the articles that I was reading about the real life people that these people were portraying. Ferranzano apparently was regularly comparing the mafia landscape of the time and the whole idea of the boss of all bosses kind of thing in a very Roman Empire type motif, if you will, which actually makes it smart during the whole the building of like the corporation, if you will, where Capone was saying like why don't you take over, right? You want to be the guy in charge, and and then Luciano said something about like I don't want to be the Caesar, but there was a reason why he was stabbed, in the middle of the street, right? Like, it's clear that Ferranzano's, Roman Empire fixations on the landscape of or the lay of the land, if you will, probably rubbed off a little bit on all the other bosses at the time, kind of thing, in a very cutthroat kind of way. You have to think that men in those positions probably do take a look at everything in those kind of Julius Caesar-esque, ways, if you will. it is a little fascinating when you take a look at that. A couple other things here. Nicholas Sadler as Mad Dog, the killer for hire. You seem to really like him in this.
Oh my God. Yeah. He was so good. And just absolutely like, he was like a cockroach. Like I want to say he was unkillable, but I mean, obviously came to his demise quite brutally. But I think that motivation though for Lucky Luciano to want to pump him full of lead was just at that point, as soon as Lucky or Charlie lost his girl, like that was that turning point. That was that motivator where he was all out of the to give.
Right.
You know? So yeah, I mean, he definitely, like, even every scene he was in, I was like, which side are you on? You're literally like creating a third. You're towing the line down the center.
Which side is he on? He's on his own. That's
he's
all
on
that
his
matters.
own
Yeah.
side. Like even that scene where he's like trying to raise the price on their heads, you know, like you could just tell that level of just slick confidence and greed and yeah, well, he was out for himself.
Everyone had a level of indestructibility, of immortality. But I don't think you get to be in those positions of power in a very, brutal landscape without that kind of attitude. And that played out well. You mentioned the point where Mad Dog killed Luciano's girl, as played by Lara Flynn Boyle. She was very, very good in this, in a very small, limited role, and this is actually, as Lara Flynn Boyle's star is on the rise. Like this was a year before Wayne's World came out, before like movies like The Temp came out, kind of thing. Like she was a star on the rise, and I think this was a good role for her, like as especially a good vehicle for her to be in.
Oh, absolutely, and I wish this movie did fare better, because I think that she was tough, she was sexy, she played it well, and again, given very limited screen time, she shone like, and you know what, I want to give props as well to like the entire cast of dancers, and just the amount of like confidence that all of those girls brought to the stage, and the choreography and the costumes. It was very much like you would expect to see in a speakeasy or a restaurant of the time. And it was so beautiful. It was like everything from there was the soul singer as well, who was just, you see like the four mobsters walking by, and at one point I think it was Costello that was making conversation with her. She didn't miss a beat. She just kept singing, because you could tell like that was her job. She was professional. She was,
doesn't matter what's going on in the bar, the band still plays.
Exactly. Like you just know that, someone could get popped at any minute in that environment, and she would not stop singing. Like, like it was just so good.
Yeah. It's funny. We talked about like if this movie was made today kind of thing. Like that's the kind of role that I think an Emma Stone probably would have fit in if this movie was done today. And it's kind of funny because as we were talking, I was just taking a look at that up. That movie that we were talking about earlier with Emma Stone is called Gangster Squad. It was released in 2013, has a tomatometer of 31%. With an audience score of 57%. So the audience score for that one is actually right on par with this, but the critic score is very, very different. So maybe somewhere down the road, we might find ourselves tackling Gangster Squad, and we may, find ourselves having kind of some of these same conversations about Emma Stone versus Lara Flynn Boyle kind of thing. But it is true, like her role almost needed to be the size that it was, but there was that whole scene in the gambling room kind of thing just before they, before they make love for the first time kind of thing. That whole like, are you going to be my friend? Because I need you to be my friend. I'm like, this is so playfully fun and sexy at the same time. Like she was the perfect match for Luciano in this.
And I think too that scene was pivotal because I'm sure that in her role as she must have been like the lead dancer or like she was the one that the mob boss there, I'm not sure of his name, but quite distinct character.
Yeah.
He was like fondling her like she was just nothing. She was part of the furniture, right? And I'm like, you know what? Like she's clearly used to being treated like that.
Yeah.
So, when Lucky, started a conversation with her, you can kind of tell that she was maybe a little standoffish and maybe just kind of like
I think it was getting a feel for Luciano in that whole coat room scene kind of thing where it's like, okay, yeah, you can come pick me up kind of thing, but I'm if I just say you want to be my friend kind of thing, like that's his reaction clearly told her everything that she needed to know, because it wasn't like I'll get we're gonna go home now. No, he's not there for that. It was very well done for Lara Flynn Boyle. I do have a bone to pick with this movie though. I do.
You and every other critic, apparently.
Well, mine is very, very specific, and it has nothing to do with the acting or the story or the direction.
Ooh.
The name is Michael Small. He is the composer for this film. Because there were times when the music just seemed a bit... For lack of a better term, Dick Tracy-esque, right? And you mentioned like the whole montages of violence kind of thing and the way that was done. Visually, it looked there were similarities to the way Dick Tracy was done the year before. But I found the music a little TV movie of the week-esque kind of thing in this. Like it needed to be pulled back at times. I think at times it was perfect. I think the tonality, like the actual song compositions were good, but there were times when it felt like, a scene was going to commercial and you had like this big sting kind of thing as it's fading to black. I was like, okay, now we're going to commercial. It's almost like they filmed it knowing that it would find a second life on television. And that's the thing about 1991 too. Like, even though films may or may not have done well at the box office, this is where life on DVD and life on VHS in the days of 7 movies in 7 days kind of thing would give these movies that extra life. And there's some movies that, like The Breakfast Club, right? Like, it's a good movie, but it's a staple of like weekend programming on channels like TBS. This movie, I think, could find that niche pocket as far as, weekend late night kind of, TV movies kind of thing.
Like a A&E weekender. Maybe
not an A&E weekender, but some of the smaller channels kind of thing, or, Life on Tubi, if you will, kind of thing. But, because it's a good movie. If someone said to you, hey, do you want to watch a 6% movie? What's your first, without knowing what movie it is? If I told you our next movie that we're doing next week is 6%, how much would you question our life choices?
Isn't that why we're here?
No, but seriously, like,
I'm learning from this show that critics are dumb. That they're just like some idiot in the basement with a pen and paper or keyboard.
Wait, I feel called out now.
And
because I'm an idiot in the basement with the microphone.
They're just saying mean things.
Yeah.
Like, for no reason. Like, really, guys, take this movie with maybe a fresh set of eyes. Maybe just step out of your expectations of, well, The Godfather is the pinnacle and everything else is and like see it from maybe the eyes of maybe its intended viewership, a younger audience, maybe, who are now learning a little piece of history along with, learning about how life really was in the 20s. And these are actual, it's loosely based, but these are actual historical people.
Yeah.
Like this is not just a movie with a script of some brilliant writer who, came up with these 4 characters. These are actual real like mobsters, right? And their storyline
I mean,
were loosely based on.
If we're being honest and fair with this movie, it covers a large amount of time and a large amount of larger and smaller stories in a cinema friendly hour and a half. That there were some points that probably felt a little bit glossed over. Like you mentioned, right? Like Slater kills the guy that ended up killing his friend, and therefore saving Meyer Lansky. And then next thing you know, okay, well now we have nice suits, and it's 5 years later. Like there's that whole section is glossed over. There are parts that do that. That's a big stretch of time.
But
they're covering.
It's a life and a career span.
It is.
Like they had to.
Yeah, that's hard to do in an hour and a half. But I like the point that you made about comparing it to The Godfather. And then when you take a look at, because this is a genre, gangster film is a genre. And if you compare every gangster film to The Godfather or The Godfather Part 2, then every other gangster film is going to suck. If you compare every science fiction space opera film to Star Wars A New Hope, then every other science fiction space opera film is going to suck. If you compare every single animated movie that comes out between now and time immemorium to Toy Story, then they're all going to suck. Judge it on its own merits, and instead of comparison critiquing, and you'll find that Mobsters is actually quite a good film. More akin to, I think the audience score at 58% is a lot closer to what this film is. Because, again, you could make some critiques, but I would be curious if someone actually took this film, analyzed it, and did a breakdown of how close it came to reality. I bet you anything people will like this film much, much more. But that being said, we have one mission left. So, Carrie.
I'm ready.
Who is your MVP of 1991's Mobsters?
Because there was no chance in hell that I could pick one of the 4 mobsters.
Okay.
I am going to go with a character that we didn't mention, and that is Rocco, the assistant, the number 2, to the mob boss.
To Ferenzano's number 2 guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, not Ferenzano. Mazzaria.
Yes.
Dom Mazzaria's number 2.
Yeah. Played by Robert Z'Dar. I thought he had that look. He had the jaw. He was a force to be reckoned with. He was menacing. And I could very much picture that he was like, he was picture perfect to be the enforcer, to be the, he was the one that showed up first in the Luciano family home. Yeah. Oh, he was perfect. And, you know what? It's mainly because we have mentioned and spoken at length about all of the other incredible talent. We also mentioned Chris Penn, who, you know, I wanted to give a nod to because I thought he was absolutely perfect. His character, the double crossing, I really enjoyed his portrayal of Tommy Reyna, but I got to go with Rocco.
I love that you mentioned Robert Z'Dar, because in an upcoming episode of this show, we are going to be talking about Samurai Cop with our good friend Sean Faust. So, you know, spoiler, guess what one of our upcoming movies is going to be? We're going to be watching Samurai Cop, and he's in it as Yamashita. So we will be talking about Robert Z'Dar once again on this show. One of these days I need to sit down and make like statistics of number of times actors have been mentioned on this show, like as far as their movies go. Like, we already know that Adam Sandler has been the subject of 3 of our episodes, and we're less than 40 episodes into the podcast. So thank you, Adam Sandler, for a glut of content that we could pull from. But of course, now Robert Z'Dar is going to have 2 mentions in on the series here. But my MVP,
who is it?
For Mobsters, F. Murray Abraham. Look, if your presence on screen lifts up the presence of everyone else, you are a phenomenal actor. And I think what F. Murray Abraham did for the role of Rothstein is he took this character that could have been a minor character in the grand scheme of things, but he turned it into so much more. And he made, like you said, like the fact that you were sad when Rothstein got killed, that shows you the level of impact that he had on this mentor role in, you know, at first glance is just heartthrobs in nice suits and machine guns. But F. Murray Abraham killed it. Absolutely killed it as Rothstein. So he is my MVP of this film. Carrie, thank you again for a wonderful show. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of It's Not That Bad. Now, here's the deal. If you think there's a film that is unfairly maligned, or that you think is so bad, you know, that we can't even think of anything good to say about it, well, we like a challenge. So hit us up on Twitter at NotThatBadCast. Let us know the movie. We will watch it, we will dissect it, and we will come up with the good things about those bad movies, because we're looking for those A grades in those B movies. Oh, I tell you, can't even talk anymore. I'm Jay. She's Carrie. This is It's Not That Bad. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, Skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.